Hey everybody, Quantum here, and in this video we're going to take a look at the main event over the June 7th and 8th weekend, I would say, and that would be the Ink Invitational 10Ks tournament in the US, 128 players. There were a couple of other big events over this weekend. We had a big event in Spain, a 4K with 94 players. We had a PPG qualifier in the US as well with 52, and a Lorcana 5K, which I believe was in Toledo. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but Ohio with 113 players, and that was a 5K. So a pretty diverse weekend. Top players probably split out amongst all these events. But like I said, the big one is probably going to be the Invitational. No surprise that I believe Kurt qualified for Worlds. He took it down with Amber Steel Aggro. I believe this was also the deck he used in the North American Championships to qualify for Worlds. I hope I'm remembering that correctly. But in Reign of Jafar, we know that the Amber Steel aggro deck has definitely come up as a tier 1 deck. It did very well at the first weekend release in the SSG tournament, and it got some very unique tools. So we take a look at Kurt's list here. Only 3 Daisy, but a 14 1-drop package, a 16 character 2-drop package with an honorary 2-drop being the new Rhino as well. This card facilitates quite a bit for these decks. Obviously very, very strong, having a 2 questing 4/3 body that has resist 2 on turn 2. Very, very strong if you do see that. Obviously it also got the new lady, and the rest of the deck is more or less the same. The new additions just being the Rhino, the lady, and, well, I guess the bigger Rhino. But yeah, very, very low to the ground package. Just a couple of 3-drops in the 8 lady and Pete's, and then 4 drops, again, Rhino if you want to look at it as a 2 or 4 drop, and the Rapunzel. We got 4 Storm and 4 Strength, 2 Rapunzel Tower, and 4 Dwarven Mine. Before I go any further, I will say that I do have a member-only meta review, and if you're a member and you're watching this video, you probably don't need to, so I apologize for not saying that to start. I did do a much deeper, in-depth review of these decks, as well as talking a little bit about rotation. I decided not to make that video public because I kind of reviewed it, and not to say that I come across as a little bit arrogant, and that wasn't the intention, but I definitely don't want to have that be the perception. But as you guys know, if you watch my channel, I don't get everything right. I'm not perfect. In fact, I probably get more things wrong than I do right. But I think I do get some of the more important things in terms of calling, like, is this card going to be good? Is it going to be meta? And when we start looking at things and analyzing things from a rotation perspective, there's a lot to digest with a deck like this. And it's going to be interesting to see, for those of you that are members and have seen that other meta video, if what I call out in that video for not just this deck, but mainly for this deck, actually comes true. But some of the things, for those of you that don't know, the lady facilitates quite a lot in this deck. It adds an additional tempo play for you by getting that additional character on board that just helps facilitate this line of play. Some people look at aggro and they say it's very linear, and for the most part that is correct. But a deck like this being piloted by a top player, I talked about this in I forget which video, but one of my analysis videos, where I say, top players generally don't play aggro because they like to have the option to pivot and be versatile and have different dimensions to their decks and their lines of play. They can say, I can go for an aggressive line, or I can go for more of a control line or a mid-range line or whatever it might be. Aggro decks generally be like all gas, and if I don't win by a certain turn, or by the time you start setting up, I just lose the game. I have no way to pivot. The Rapunzel's Tower gives you a little bit of flexibility there, as with the Dwarven Mine. So that helps, and then the lady just helps facilitate that extra push that you might need, right? So does the Rhino being that very resistant, pun intended, body that comes out on board, just helps you push through what answers your opponent might have, and it can be very strong for that reason. So it's interesting when you look at the top 16 in this field. I think we got to go back because the site's being a little weird here. When you look at the top 16, I think there were only 2 aggro decks, or what I would say is true aggro decks, in the Chernadog, and obviously the winning deck list in Kurt's list. So I'm not trying to take anything away or sound cocky or arrogant or anything like that, but it just, if anything, goes to show you the skill that Kurt has to pilot a deck like this in, what people may have thought was, myself included, an emerald discard oriented meta, which, we may be wrong about that, but the reason we brought that up, which we can explain when we get to this, it did come top 3, but we can explain that a little bit more. Or a control oriented meta, which, for an invitational is much more expected, because you would expect, same thing that happened at European Championships and at North American Championships, right? You saw red blue before it got Sapphire Coil, and Hiram had been banned because of how impressive that deck was. A lot of people gravitated towards the control decks because it's the decks that give you the most versatile options. So, for 2 out of 16 decks in the top 16 being tempo, control, Steel Song is still, I would argue, like a control deck to a certain degree, but you could disagree with that. It just goes to show you, like, yeah, aggro is not too popular, but more credit just goes to show you, if anything, how Kurt is able to, it's amazing skill in my opinion by Kurt. Again, I didn't see any matches, but I've seen Kurt play before, and definitely one of the smartest players in the game for sure. So congrats to him on taking that event down with an aggro deck in the Dwarf Mine. Congratulations. All right, next up we've got Bounce, which is Emerald Amethyst. Tempo-oriented list, which is pretty cool. Not a discard-oriented list, which is always nice to see in my opinion. But Colpos, hopefully I'm saying that name correctly. Probably not though. We've got 12 1-drops. Kind of interesting option in the 1 Turnabog Followers and the 3 Diablos. Instead of just going 4 of one or the other. 4 Merfolk, 4 Pegasus. No big Pegasus shift line. So just as a 1-cost evasive. 4 Tamago. Even if you don't play it for its ability, just being a 2-cost 2/2 body that has evasive and can quest for 1 is good, but obviously the kicker ability is extremely strong. 4 Ursula Deceiver, staple in Emerald pretty much. 4 Cloud Kicker on 3, a very big 3-drop package here. 2 Lewis, 2 Lyle, 4 Madam Mim, 4 Merlin Crab, 2 Peter Pan Shadow. It's funny because in the member only video I kind of was like confused. And then I kind of came to the realization that, it's good to do that, because if you talk through the options that you're thinking about, it helps you like critically think about things, and hopefully it helps, other people realize that, we need to think about these things a little bit more. And again, it's not trying to be judgmental. Obviously these guys are all top players and I'm not inside their heads. So, I'm just trying to understand things from my own perspective and maybe try to explain them to you guys. And I may not always be correct. So, always appreciate the comments if I do mess something up, to just point it out. But I was like, I don't understand why there would be 2 Peter Pan Shadowfinder, no Iagos or anything, obviously. And Iago is a tough meta call, because into a steel-oriented meta, Iago is significantly worse because, strength and storm and instantly out the Iago, right? So Iago is definitely a tough card to make work. Which is awkward, right? Because then you're like, do I play Peter Pan Shadow? And then I would want to play like Ruby Amethyst because I want to play Shark and the other evasive cards. But how much value do I get off the Shadow Finder if I'm not playing like, the other Amethyst cards that can benefit off it, which is mainly Iago. But when I look back at this and I'm like, oh, you don't actually need this as a Diablo answer or as an evasive answer, because you got these 2 evasives up here, which are coming down on 1 and or 2. And your Crab can follow these up, or the Cricky later on, and they can trade out into the evasive threats, whether that be Diablo or not. So you don't necessarily always need the Shadow Finder, but it having Rush and coming down on 3 is a good answer if you do see it. But if you don't see it, it's fine, because you have these other options as well. So that's the kind of conclusion that I came to, because this is the only thing that I was generally confused about, and it took me a little while to get there. But the rest of this list I think looks really nice. I like the Lewis and the Lyle. I talk about the ratios and stuff in the member video about how consistency matters versus tech options. I go really in depth in that, but I'm not going to go over that here. Otherwise, this video would end up being an hour long, just like the other one. But again, if you're looking for some constructive, hopefully, I shouldn't say that, but like hopefully you find a constructive concepts around deck building and stuff. Hopefully that you would find that stuff interesting. 4 Genie, 4 Merlin Goat, no Merlin Rabbit, which again, an interesting call. You're on 14 uninkables already, so you probably value the Genie aggression over the Rabbit control, because you are a tempo deck. You're looking to play, progressively with your cards, but your redrawing options here are fairly limited. The 2 Cricky, the 4 Elsa, and the 2 Ursula Sea Witch Queen. If you watch my videos, I'm a huge fan of this card, being able to shift onto Ursula Deceiver. And what's interesting is they never come back. I don't really or have not really run into this card all that much, and I've never played it myself yet. But I can see where it could potentially work in this deck. Obviously, just as a standalone card, it could be good into any matchup, right? stopping a big Sisu from readying up and questing for game next turn, or a Tamatoa stopping Daisy Ducks from readying and going for like 8 lore on the next turn. Like, it has a lot of utility in anything, and it's inkable, right? If not, it's an action, so you have to raw play it out. You can't sing it. But where this card can get extra value in a deck like this, I think, is off of like Ursula and Elsa. Not that you'd really use it with the Elsa, because it's probably not a good value play to like pay 5 for Elsa, tap something down, and then pay another 3. There's a total of 8 ink to make it not ready. It's usually not going to be what you want to do. But the Ursula, right, if it survives a turn and you're able to quest with it and force tap down what the opponent has, and maybe you don't have the characters or the strength on board to take out what you just tapped down, you can follow up with then they never come back. And what you tap down with the Ursula Sea Witch Queen doesn't ready up, and you've just bought yourself an extra turn, right? Maybe you then, draw into Lewis or Lyle to claw back lore, or your Crab, or your, some play to, or maybe you just quest for game next turn off the Ursula again or something, like there's a lot of cool synergy that you can do with this deck. And then the Friends and the Mother Knows Best as your only songs there. So yeah, 8 non-character options. The Mother Knows Best, Mother Knows Best is a very good card. What I think we've come to realize is we see Steel and we see Ruby have somewhat conditional removal, right? Like Steel deal X amount of damage. It may not always be enough to get over the willpower. Ruby with like big Sisu, small Sisu, Brawl, etc. Ruby does have the generic just be prepared Dragonfire, and how many, if you've been playing since inception, how many times have you been like, okay, like here's my game winning play or my setup. Hopefully you don't have that B prep, or hopefully you don't have that, Dragonfire. Those are big expensive cards and are uninkable. You could argue that Emerald has stronger cards now for removal, which is crazy to say, but when you look at something like the Wrong Lever package, Wrong Lever, in my opinion, is potentially the strongest removal option in the game now. It is an action, it's not a song, but similar to Mother Knows Best, Wrong Lever is, if I have pulled a lever in my discard, I put your card, your character to the bottom of your deck, and that just straight up removes it without banishing it, so it doesn't trigger banish effects, and it doesn't put it into your inkwell like Sapphire decks do. That is an insanely powerful removal option, like insanely powerful. Mother Knows Best bounces it back to hand. I mean, Wrong Lever without the pull the lever in the discard also bounces it back to hand. Wrong Lever is inkable. Mother Knows Best isn't. Mother Knows Best is a song. Wrong Lever is not a song. It's an action. But the inkability of Wrong Lever definitely helps its versatility, right? I mean, these cards are, you probably don't want to ink them if you don't have to, because they are some of the strongest removal options, but it's crazy to me to say, like, when I actually sit and think about it, and I'm like, Bruno, instantly just bounce a card back. Mother Knows Best, uninkable, but bounce a card back, and they're both songs, and now you have Wrong Lever to add to that versatility. Like, that's just crazy how many good, efficient, tempo-oriented removal options you have. Like, I almost say I would prefer them over the Ruby ones, just because it's inkable and it's not conditional, right? It's crazy how Emerald looks. The Boogeyman, in my opinion, in Emerald Steel. What I will say, I've done this recording now like twice or 3 times. This is the 3rd time. With Emerald Steel, when you look at an invitational event where a lot of top players are going, and I made this point in the member video, you generally will not see people play what's a deck that can lose to itself potentially in a top level field where you would expect people to know and tech against the best deck. It was different with Red Blue, because Red Blue has a lot of versatile options, even though that's another deck that does lose to itself back when people played it. It became a lot more resilient after like Sail, for sure, because you could cut down on the uninkables. You were no longer playing 20 uninkables. But Green Steel is a different kind of beast when it comes to it can lose to itself, right? Because if you just don't see certain cards, you just lose the game. That really isn't the case with Red Blue so much, because you had so many redraw options. Although you could argue that if you don't see the Hiram, you would see that, right? People would lose the game, essentially. Like, the Hiram is the make or break back then, before set 8, or before set 7, I should say, when it was super popular. But when you look at Green Steel, it's still, I think, the best deck in the format, but it is a deck that loses to itself. And when you're taking this deck to a, pro player tournament where you're not seeing a very wide open field, it's not like a DLC. Like, Emerald Steel, when you're playing this at your local level, and you're playing against a tryhard who plays Emerald Steel, not everybody at your locals, or not everybody at a DLC or at a large scale open tournament is going to be a top level player, a pro player who their life may not be Lorcana, but it's a pretty significant portion of their life, right? Like Lorcana is what I practice in my off time. I don't have, any other major hobbies. Like this is my hobby, and this is what I practice. And I know the game very well. I know my matchups. I know my metagame. I know what decks are good. I know my interactions. And when you play against other players that are like that, you won't have the same amount of success with a deck like this because there are some lines, don't get me wrong, that Emerald Steel can play that are just unbeatable, but other top players will know how to play into this deck properly and beat it, right? And that's maybe why you don't see so much discard in the top 8 or top 16. A lot of people, or maybe there were a lot at this event, is 128 players, but there was literally only one discard in the top 16, right? So either, which I'm totally willing to accept, I and a few others that have called it were wrong about the Emerald meta. But I think if you look at some other tournaments, and again at the local level, you'll see that discard probably does very, very well. But in a top level tournament, like I said, it's 2 aggro and the rest is control, and I would argue discard is control. But into other control decks, discard, I would say, is still favored. But if you don't get your game plan off with if you don't get a very good curve with discard into the control deck, the good control players will just run away with the game, and you'll have no chance as a discard player, right? Like the best example I can give you is when Ed faced Zan, probably 2 of the top players in North America, right? If not the top 2 players. And Ed on Ruby Amethyst was still able to take the game over Zan. And if you go back and you watch that matchup, I know because I reviewed it and did a commentary over it. I think it was game 3 that was streamed. I think it was that Zan did not see the Diablo on curve, and didn't develop a Prince John until maybe a little bit later. And that gave Ed enough time to develop a little bit of his game plan with Ruby Amethyst. And then by the time Zan was getting set up, and you could see it in that match if I remember correctly, you can see that Zan was starting to come back. And if Ed didn't get further ahead in the earlier parts of that game, he probably would have lost. But because Zan just didn't see the cards he needed, it wasn't that Zan misplayed or anything. Like the deck kind of just let Zan down, honestly. And that's what happens. And that's the risk you play with these kind of decks sometimes. Maybe you open 3 Prince Johns and 2 Diablos because you mulliganed away some cards and you kept the Diablo and you drew into another one and you drew into like 2 Prince Johns or something. And now your hand is just all these uninkables that you're like, my opponent's going to set up big time, and yeah, I'll set up eventually, but like my setup is not nearly as effective as his in the early game if I can't properly play on curve. And Emerald Steel discard, like, and this is one of the weaknesses that it has, right, is that you don't play defined ratios like you do in other decks as much. Like you can see, you don't play 8 1-drops, you play 6. So sometimes you miss your 1-drop. I mean, you do play a Cove for 7, but like that's not a character. I play 7 2-drops. I don't play 8. I don't play 10. I don't play 12. I play less than 8. Your 3 drops is quite hefty, yeah, because there's just a lot of good cards on 3. But there is a chance that I miss playing a card on a critical early point in the game, and I have to keep my ratios this way because I have to play a very large song package because that's how my deck wins. Again, if I get set up, deck is almost unbeatable, right? And you don't need to take my word for it. Just watch Emerald Steel gameplay and watch the majority of them when they do get set up. They are very, very hard to stop, but they're not impossible, but they are very oppressive. And so that's kind of what you see with Emerald Steel discard. And it's funny because, big shout outs to Morgan Shamblin, who actually posted on my matchup with him versus Zen. I think it was in top 16. Where I made a comment on a point in the match of like, it's very interesting that Morgan went for this play because like he would lose to this. And he commented on that and he said something like, I can't play as if Emerald Steel always has the answer to everything because they always do. And then I think he said something like, not that they always do, but they always could have any answer to anything at any point in time because that's just how the deck is. And I'm like, yep, I understand that. That's why I say like the deck sometimes is just on curve. It's just unbeatable because if it gets its game plan off, no matter how much better you are in the top end with your deck, Emerald Steel discard will just not let you get there, right? If Emerald Steel discard executes its plan, the game is over early, right? And Morgan made a point of saying, I had to play as if he didn't have the perfect out, right? And that's an amazing philosophy to have, because that separates top players from regular players like me. I would have lost, and not that I would even get there to begin with. So let's just make that clear. But like if I was there, I would have been like trying to play the safest route, and I would have lost, because I wouldn't have made that gamble to say, you know, I can't play this line, because if I play this line and he has exactly this, and he probably does, I lose. And Morgan was like, no, you can't play like that, because technically anything that I do, it's a bad matchup for me, right? I'm Emerald, Amethyst, aggro, and he's Emerald, Steel, discard. I'm in like, and I called, everybody knows, right? And I was saying in the commentary, like, it's a bad matchup. But if you have the out for everything, then you can never play any line. So like he played the line and he was successful and he won that game. I mean, I know he lost overall, but very, very smart insight from Morgan on that analysis. You can't be scared, right, of these decks always having the direct answer. But again, if you play against them, sometimes it's like, well, you just do have everything sometimes. But yeah, it's worth spending time, because again, this was the deck that everyone thought, myself included, was going to be the best deck of the format. I do think it still is the most oppressive deck of the format, and potentially is the best deck of the format, but it still has some of the same weaknesses. No Beyond the Horizon in this list, instead opting for the I'm Still Here. And I think that's a testament to the expected metagame. You're going into a metagame where you're expecting a lot of top players. Good meta call. As you can tell, the decks that were probably on Emerald Steel that were playing Beyond the Horizon didn't make top 16. Did not make top 16. What did make top 16 is a lot of control decks, a lot of Steel Song decks. And what does Steel Song do into Green Steel? Well, they get their song tripped by Ursula Deceiver, but they also out Diablo a lot. And I'm Still Here is a great tech option, because if you're able to shift Diablo saying I'm Still Here, you draw a card and you give your Diablo resist +2. What is resist great into? Steel. My Diablo lives for a turn. You can't storm it. You can't strength it. It's going to live for a turn, and maybe that extra turn allows me to discard 2 more cards from your hand, dealing with the songs that would have answered my Diablo. Very smart meta call. It would be interesting to know if there were other Emerald Steel decks that were trying to play the Beyond the Horizon and they just fizzled out, and the lists that played the I'm Still Here obviously ended up, making top 3, which is pretty good. Moving on to Red Blue. This is a deck that I wouldn't have expected a lot in the format. There's not much to explain here that's different from previous formats, from my understanding. Still on the develops and the popsicles, the sails and the T-bows, the vision, the Maui shark. 4 Tamatoa for only 4 popsicle, which is understandable, since again your card draw engine is fairly limited now without Hiram. Interesting to see the Lilo as a new option. The biggest change for this deck, I would say, is the exclusion of the McDuck Manor for 4 Super Goof. And that might be an adaptation into the Steel meta, where you are saying, or Daryl in this case was saying, I don't need setup options. I don't need to set up a McDuck Manor and then the Shark, and then you have to choose, do I turn my stuff sideways to deal with the Manor, and then I make myself vulnerable to Shark. It's like, I don't need all that. I need a way to survive aggro. I need a way, Amber Steel has shown itself to be a threat. Churna Dogs is around, and that's where the Super Goof, I think, can come in really, really nicely. You still get the lore gain as if you would off of McDuck Manor, at least for 1 turn that it challenges, if not 2 turns that it can challenge. And it's instant. You don't have to wait the whole turn before the McDuck Manor procs. But the Super Goof, I think, is a great meta call. Obviously did very well for Daryl here, coming in top 4. But the rest of it, I think, is just pretty standard, right? Yes, it doesn't synergize as well with the B preps, but your Goofy is probably just getting outed by the time you B prep. You're challenging with it, it's getting challenged back, and it's off the board, and then you're like, B prep. So yes, the McDuck Manor into the B prep is nice, obviously, but I think, and you're seeing this, and top level players often do this, and when I build my deck lists, if you look at my deck profiles, I often talk about this. It's, you want to play the cards that give you the most chance for success, and the cards that give you the most chance for success is not the cards that you can just, stack upon, win more kind of thing, where like I'm on the play and I need this card because when I'm on the play, this card makes me win faster or better or whatever. It's like I need to play the cards that give me the chance to react in losing positions. And cards with rush, cards that tap things down in amethyst, those are the kind of cards that can cause disruption and are very good at doing that. And so I think this is a great meta call. Don't get me wrong, McDuck Manor can do it too with the B preps. B prep is a big reset button, obviously, and it's why DKP's list has, been very successful in the past, and great innovation by DKP himself to make that list. But when you look at how the meta shifts and the options that you need to pivot towards, I think the Super Goof is a great call, and again, seems to worked out very well for Daryl here, coming in 4th place. Next up, no Steel Song in the top 4, but definitely in the top 8. 2 of them, actually, but both losing out in their top 8s. The Rhino package pretty much being adapted. Great to see Namari. Again, we've talked about this a lot on the channel, how this card fits into some Steel lists, particularly Steel Amber lists. 3 Naveen's, which I think is coming back into Steel Song, being able to sing a lot of these top-end songs. Pretty interesting. It's kind of funny that, and I pointed this out in the member video too, where we got the confirmation that Whole New World was not going to be reprinted. Kind of weird that it's the only card that was explicitly announced early to be not reprinted, instead of waiting to see the list of cards that were reprinted and seeing this excluded from the list. Acts as a little bit of validation for me, being somebody who's been around for a while with card games. And again, it's not me. It's not anything special. If you've played this game since set 1, Steel Song has been a tier 1 deck every single format for the past 8 sets. You know that this card can potentially be very unfair, and it really limits how you have to build and play decks when this deck is always around in the format. And I think we're ready to move on from this. And so when I said I don't really see this card being reprinted, I know that's a hard thing for some people to hear who are Steel Song players or like to see the Whole New World, but it's just reality, right? To be honest, I would be a discard player, and it's no secret that I don't think that it's a good concept for the game, but it's an easy concept for you to win at locals with, right? So why not keep it around if that's all you're doing, but it's not healthy for the game. And again, you don't have to take my word for it, just play against it. And unless you're a pro player and know every single intricacy about the game, it's very likely that discard wins most of the time that it plays against your regular deck. Anyways, that aside, yeah, it's one last swan song, pun intended, for Amber Steel Song this set before this deck as we know it is rotated out of the format, but still out here doing work. Again, the Rhino package in here does the same thing as it does in Amber Steel aggro. You're back on the Naveen's because, again, you probably need that instant value coming down singing Zeus, coming down singing A Whole New World, because if your lines get disrupted, having that instant Naveen Whole New World is very, very nice. Interesting to see the adaptation on the Grab Your Swords. I wonder if these are increasing because of the SSG tournament, right, where we saw Emerald Steel with the Prince Johns and Amber Steel aggro really come to the forefront of the metagame, and Grab Your Swords obviously cooks both of those decks if it can resolve and doesn't get Ursula ripped in the Emerald matchups. But yeah, this card hitting down like an Exerted Smee that took a damage, hitting down the Piglet, hitting down Lady that comes in and plays a card for free. Not great when it hits a Daisy and then they Rapunzel heal on the following turn, but that's a different story. Obviously great to out the Prince John and Diablos that don't have resist or are on a cove. Yeah, so a lot of different things there. Pretty interesting stuff. And yeah, the one of Cinderella I like as well. Every time I've tried Steel Song, which I wasn't really a Steel Song player in the past, I've picked it up a little bit more now. Definitely learned a lot. But sadly it's probably for nothing because, like I said, the Whole New World is not getting reprinted. But yeah, I like the Cindy line. I play 2. You can argue that that's a mistake and 1 is probably better, or 0, but I like this card because it adds another dimension to the deck. When you do get this out, this card can literally just win you a game out of nowhere. It's also very versatile because when you sing songs, you can challenge ready characters. It's very hard for certain decks to deal with. Some decks just have no answer. Like you get this on board and you just start cleaning stuff up left, right, and center. You outstuff with your songs, you outstuff with the Cinderella, and all of a sudden your board states switch, where your opponent had the dominant board state, and all of a sudden now you do. Like, that's the impact Cinderella can have. Obviously, in some matchups, it's terrible, and just ink it if that's the case, and that's the versatility of this card. But yeah, overall, I like it. I like this list a lot. I think it's pretty good. Ooh, the spiciest lists. The spiciest list, in my opinion. And again, if you've watched my channel, my friend, my testing partner, R-Race, every format he tries to make Mufasa work. And this was a great meta call for this tournament because Mufasa is one of the decks that does very well into mid-range and control decks, and that's what a lot of the, at least top 16, appeared to be. It can definitely hold its own against aggro to a certain degree. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Where this deck does struggle is into discard and a little bit into blurple, I would say. And there's no blurple in the top 16. And there was only one discard in the top 16. So it would be interesting to know what the breakdown was for this tournament. Out of the 128 players, how many of them brought amber, or not amber, well, I guess amber, emerald discard, amethyst, emerald discard, and as well, of course, emerald steel discard. But yeah, there's a lot of things happening in this list. Again, I break it down much more in depth in my member video, but just, looking at it on the surface, the Snow White is a great tech option. As you can see here, not a lot of 2-drops, but being able to heal up your Mulan to protect it for a shift so that it's not susceptible to a storm or a strength, which you can see steel is very popular in this tournament, is very nice. Also healing up the Mulan so that it can just be that 2-3 challenger potentially is also nice. Or playing the Gothel following up with a Snow White could also be nice. The Gaston on 3, right? This is one of your key plays because on turn 4 you ink and then hopefully you deploy one of your very beefy removal threats. Like this, one of these two coming down on turn 4 is very, very nice, especially if you have, especially if you're on the play and not on the draw. But on the draw, this is one of those, again, one of the concepts I just talked about in the when we were reviewing the Ruby Sapphire video, and this is a way for you to claw back advantage, right? Your opponent has the ink advantage. They're playing their higher cost stuff out every turn. First, what are one of the ways that you can claw back advantage? It is ramp. And this is the form of amber ramp that you can facilitate this. You get a bigger body on board that gets instant removal and probably positively trades out. So like a Maui, it can potentially go 2 for 1. You out a threat when it comes in, and then you challenge away another threat or force your opponent to into an awkward game state to deal with this overstated card that you played early. Pongo is one of your card advantage engines. Not really great, but it's all you really got. I talked about that Ruby Amethyst Hades being a card that Amber Ruby should have got, but unfortunately it didn't, so you're still stuck with this. For 3-cost Sisu as your other 3-drop option. So obviously as a Mufasa oriented deck, you want to play more higher end cards and less lower end cards because you want to hit bigger off the Mufasa, which is kind of strange because the more I play against Mufasa, and I play this myself a little bit too, like I like Amber Ruby's ink pairing. I think it's very strong, still needs help, but I find myself very rarely end up actually deploying a Mufasa. And I think when I play against my friend, I mean, he definitely gets them out against me, but definitely not as much as he used to. And I think that's a testament to you just need cards that provide more value. Like this card can be good in certain situations, but because when it comes down, like it's not doing something to advance the game state, it's a sticky card, right? It's just like it depends on the meta whether or not the Mufasa itself is good to play versus, it being situationally good to play. But yeah, this goes back to, again, some of that fundamental deck building stuff that I was talking about in the member video where I say like the things that are 2-ofs, 1-ofs, obviously they're not fundamental cards to your strategy unless you can search them, right? This Yu-Gi-Oh combo, Magic combo stuff. But the cards that are 4-ofs, like Rapunzel, like Surfer Stitch, I need to see those cards. And I would agree with the way that Matthew built this deck because Amber Ruby needs card draw, right? It doesn't necessarily need Pongo. It's not the strongest card for card advantage. Rapunzel and Surfer Stitch are. You need to see these cards, you need to proc these cards, you need to draw off these cards. You don't want to lose tempo every time to proc a Pongo for a card, right? So generally you actually don't ever want to use this if you can avoid it, unless you're in a game state where you can't afford to not play something or not play something on curve and pay the 2 ink to get a character to your hand. But the Rapunzel and the Stitch coming in as bodies, getting their instant value of drawing cards, definitely cards you need to see in the matchup to sustain enough gas to push through. We already talked about the 6-drops, right? Because Gaston into these 6-drops, but even playing these on curve on turn 6 are also still strong. The Mulan shift, we talked about that. I can tell you, like, if this thing hits the board, like the shift, and then it takes something out, and you lose 3 characters because of it, you're gonna probably lose that game. Like, that's how strong this shift line is. So yeah, you have to respect it, which is crazy. One of the Wreck-It Ralph card is definitely good, but a 7-cost uninkable is quite hefty. It's amazing stats. quest for 2 and gains you 2 lore if you get back a Rapunzel, which is usually what you're aiming for, but of course you can get back any character. 2 of the Sisu, 3 Maleficent Dragon, 1 Invited to the Ball, and 2 Teeth and Ambitions. The teeth are interesting. You know, I've tested it, my variations with teeth, but not in this format, simply because of Diablo. I've also tested Brawls, and I've also tested B Preps. I said I think B Preps are needed in Amber Ruby, but obviously, you know, Matthew was able to have great success without them, so congrats to him. You know, congrats to him just in general for playing the spiciest list of the format, or of the tournament, I would say. So, yeah, really, really good stuff there. I was really surprised when I saw this initially, and I'm not trying to take credit or take anything away, but I just find it really validating that David and another player, spoiler alert, was able to take this kind of shell. And again, the version that I built, if you watch my channel, is very different, admittedly. But again, if you watch the channel, you know we tested out the Queen of Hearts, the Ursula, the Madame Medusa, the big Ursula shift, the Hades. Obviously, we talked about this card when it was first revealed, being like potentially the new way to play Ruby Amethyst. I think I literally have a video named that. You know, my list was focused around Peter Pan Shadow and Iago, and locations, not around Tremaines and things like that, and Finders Keepers, because I was teching more into the Emerald meta, right, against Diablo, still having answers for that, etc. But as we just discussed, Peter Pan Shadow, Shark, Iago itself, not a great call right now because of all the steal in the metagame. So this list, you know, definitely shows great foresight on David and, you know, his team's part to put together something like this. No Pegasus or Vanellope, you know, too cost evasive to deal with the Diablo. They do still have the Elsa, the Genie, the Madame Medusas for cost 2 or less, so it doesn't deal with the Diablo 3, but still very relevant, can help deal with some of those singers in Steel Song. The Tremaine just coming in and always getting value. The Maui obviously always getting 2 for 1 usually. The Elsa tapping stuff down and being able to out at the Crab value. The Fox value instantly coming in getting rush. The Ursula and the Queen of Hearts being able to take the damage off the Medusa or the Hades. No Palace Guard, which, you know, you don't really care too much if Palace Guard gets outed by a Strength or a Storm usually, but it's still tempo loss for you. So you do care a little bit, especially since Storm is a redraw. But again, in a steel-oriented meta, the Vanish cards aren't going to be the strongest, so take that into consideration. Good meta call, though, like I said. Good build, very consistent looking overall. No random one-ofs or anything. Even the Hades at 3. And I talked about this in my video where I said, you know, Hades, while it is an amazingly strong card, it does suffer into like the discard metas, because you don't want to have this card being a 7-cost card sitting in your hand dead. It's going to get discarded by, you know, all the discard decks out there, but before you can actually play it and see value. I tested without Be Prepared, so I quickly realized that, you know, yep, you definitely want to be playing B Preps. And what's cool is you have Ursula to sing it. If you don't have the Ursula on board, your Hades could sing it, but usually you don't ever want to sing with either of them because, you know, this quest for 3 and exerts, and then this quests and draws. So way better to quest with them than it is to sing with them. But in a pickle, of course, you can sing with the Ursula. If the Ursula is on board, you can't sing with the Hades. You'd have to sing with the Ursula. So, but yeah, really good list. And like I said, a little bit of validation that, you know, the concept that I thought would work, and I tried to build, you know, day 0 before day 1 of this set coming out, that David was able to take this deck. And, you know, I'm not taking credit by any means. I'm sure he probably didn't even know I made a video about it. It's probably something he just cooked up himself. But just to show that I could be on the same wavelength as somebody who's a top player to top one of these tournaments is, you know, a little, you know, it's like a little warm feeling inside for me. It's like, nice, Quantum, like maybe you do know what you're talking about. You're not just talking out your butt a little bit, which, you know, is a good thing to see, because I don't go to competitive tournaments. I wish I could. In another life, maybe. But would I actually be able to perform? That's a whole other story. Who knows? But yeah, David, very proud to see that he was piloting Ruby Amethyst and did very well, getting top 8. The final top 8 list is another Steel Song, which I'm not going to spend too much time on here. This one is way more traditional, with the Gastons, with the Daisy, with the Robin Hood shift. 3 copies of Grab Your Swords. Interesting to see the 2 Namaris being adapted into this list as well. But Aside from that, it's Steel Song. Nothing really to explain here, except for the Robin Hood shift. I've tried to make this work, and it never in this format, in the range Jafar format, and every time it just doesn't come together for me. So it just not doesn't work for me. But obviously in this list, you wouldn't play Naveen because you're already on 18 uninkables. But opting for the shift package of Robin Hood instead is another way to turn on all of these high cost songs, which are very high impact. The extra copies of the Grab Your Swords is really relevant as well, giving you a little bit more play into the aggro and the discard meta if you were expecting that also. So really, standard cool list. Obviously an amazing pilot to get this far with this list. So congrats to Philip on that. And yeah, the only other thing I think we should take a look at is the other aggro list that made top 8 in Chernadogs. I go into depth a lot about Amber and its future state in my member video. So if you made it this far, there's little pieces of insights, not necessarily correct, just my own personal opinions as to where Amber and aggro goes from here. But this list here, not too much has changed from the previous list of Chernadog. You've got the Lady being adapted in, and this is one of the reasons why Lady is so expensive, is because in the Amber aggro lists, you play Lady. So if you're playing this, you need ladies. Similar to why Rapunzel is so expensive. If you're playing anything Amber, you are playing Rapunzel. It's also a legendary, but Lady's significantly cheaper than Rapunzel, but that's the reason why. And we talk a lot about these two cards in that member video. I talk about this new Tramp as well. It's a good card, undoubtedly. I think it's pretty much accepted at this point that it's going to be played in Chernadog. But I think there are cases to be made where you don't necessarily need to play this, because when you look at this list, right, it's a lot of 1 and 2 drops for sure, but like 3 Crickies, very interesting, because you're moving into mid-range territory. Same with this Tramp. Like, are you really shifting this Tramp onto this one? Or are you just going to try to raw play this out? Obviously, this Tramp, the one from set 7, I think is still the best value Tramp. The ability to draw through like 5 or 6 cards and then discard them is crazy. What's interesting about this deck, though, it says when you play this character, you may draw a card for each other character you haven't played, then choose and discard that many cards. What's crazy about this card is, could you imagine playing this when your opponent has a Diablo Exerted and a Prince John up? If you draw 3, they draw 3 for their Diablo, and then you discard 3, they draw 3 for the Prince John. So you go -1 still, because you played this card, so you're -1 in your hand. I mean, you still develop the body, and then your opponent goes +6 off of you drawing and discarding 3. That's wild, eh? Anyways, Chernadog, still a viable deck. I think it will be around next format. I comment on, I think they do reprint Chernabog, because they would like a deck like this to remain in the format, which I think is fine, right? And it'll be interesting to see what other support this deck gets in the future. And I think Peter was the other teammate utilizing pretty much the same list. Instead of genies, they were on rabbits, though. So it looks like the genie list ended up making top 8. This one made top 16, so I'm sure they were teammates or something. You can't really just boil it down to, he played genie, so he made it because of that. Obviously there's a lot to matchups, who won die rolls, that kind of thing, what kind of hands that they have. But yeah, I think genie plays into this kind of list with the Hades better personally than the rabbit would, because you don't necessarily need the bounce and rebound to the rabbit, because you're expecting the Hades to do a lot of that heavy lifting. What's interesting is, like, you don't see a lot of Sapphire. Like, literally there's 2 Sapphires, and I doubt, like, this one wasn't playing the Sapphire Hades, and I doubt this one would be either. This one was a Queen item build, pretty cool, with Oswald. So you're like, people's answers to the big Hades is actually fairly limited, and if you get that card out, it's very hard to stop without like the direct removal option for it. So for that reason, like, this card likely survives most of the time when it comes down. Again, you don't know that until you see what the metagame is at the tournament you're at, but obviously it was a very good call in the end. If there was a bunch of Blurple running around with 4 Hades everywhere, for the Hades Infernal Schemer from the first chapter, you know, and this card gets instantly outed every time, like it's a different story. I mean, it still gets value when it comes in, but in that scenario, maybe the rabbit is better, because if you're expecting a blurple heavy meta, the genie gets outed immediately and it doesn't do anything, whereas the rabbit draws you a card and then it draws you another card when it gets into your inkwell. So you get the ink and you get the card draw. So rabbit went like +3, or you know, +2, but it also replaced itself. So like these metagame considerations matter quite a bit. Yeah, so this one was a much more like a shorter video. I don't go into like nearly as in depth on some of these things as I do in the member video, but again, I really hope I didn't come across as arrogant in this video or in the member video. But yeah, I just like to make references to the analysis that I've made in the past, because again, if you've watched if you watched my videos, you know that's our intent. Our intent is to try to break certain things down and explain certain things and show those interactions. One of the things that I said in the member video is it's very interesting to me that people don't, it's not even just for me, it's for like a lot of other content out there too, like other content creators. They don't watch matchup videos nearly as much as they watch like deck profiles and like things like that, and meta reports, obviously. And that's wild to me, because when you look at like any top player in anything, whether it be like sports, like basketball, but they review match footage, right? Top players in card games, they review match footage because they need to learn interactions. They need to learn like their own match footage, where their own mistakes are happening, that kind of thing. And it's akin to what you did in school, right? If you like, you think back to like high school math, like if you took calculus or any math general course, there were, at least in Canada, and I'm sure it's the same in the States and maybe in parts of Europe and stuff too, these tests are broken down into like categories, right? You have like a general knowledge section, which just tests some basic equations, you know, can you just solve this equation? And it's just general knowledge. It's like, yeah, like I understand the concepts of these mathematical principles, or, you know, these equations and how they work. And then you move on to the application portion, which puts these problems into scenarios that you have to extrapolate information from and make determinations on what's relevant and how do I piece together, what equations do I use? Do I use this equation or that equation? And what variables do I put in? And what are those variables? What am I trying to solve for? That is like matchup gameplay. That is like, can I actually apply what I'm learning? The deck profile is like the general knowledge section. It's like, okay, this is how the deck is built and I understand the concepts, but can I actually apply them? Can I actually win with the deck? Do I understand the interactions? And that's where, like, well, obviously play testing yourself, but watching the match footage and understanding those interactions, because even if you're play testing yourself, you could be making tons of misplays over and over and over again. And it's not until it's pointed out to you. And this is why people pay for coaching. It's why professional sports have coaching and stuff like that. And it's not always the best players that make the best coaches, right? You know, if you look at sports teams, it's very rare actually that top players become the best coaches. I mean, sometimes it happens and definitely has, but it's not all the time. In the grand scheme of things, it's not the case, right? But in general, I mean, maybe it's a little bit different because athletic ability is different than like cognitive ability to a certain extent. So maybe card games is a little bit different there, but, you know, without getting too far off topic, what I'm trying to say is match footage is very important, especially when you watch videos. And again, not just me, other top players, if anything, better to review match footage of top players, where they're actually explaining their interactions and what they're doing. Not just watching their, you know, oh, let me just watch a top player play at a DLC and maybe you can extrapolate, oh, this is maybe why he made this play and not that play. But if you actually watch someone commentate and explain, and this is probably why, you know, some of my videos get decent views, I think, is because I may not be the best at it, but like I try my best to explain, you know, this is why I made this decision. And oh, in hindsight, it's actually wrong because I'm looking back at it and like, this is what I was thinking and I can see that that's wrong. Or this is what I was thinking and I think this is right. Right? Or this is why I would do this. And it seems very unorthodox, but this is what I have to play around. And it's very insightful, I think, when, at least when I watch other top players make decisions. You know, when you watch, like, for example, top Yu-Gi-Oh creators, that's a very complex game. And every time I watch certain players and I see some of the lines that they go for and then they're explaining it and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I would never, ever think about doing that in that scenario. But it's like, it's crazy to me that I can like now adapt that into my gameplay. and I win now because I make those kinds of decisions based off reviewing that footage. So that's just a little nugget at the end of this video for those of you that stuck around. There were other nuggets in the member only video, but this is one of the things that I explained. So it's very strange to me that people opt not to review the matchup footages as much as they prefer to review the deck profiles. If you really want to become a top player, you need to understand interactions. And again, maybe you can do that through playtesting and improve through there, and that's great if you can. But I think there's a lot to be learned when you can critically think through when someone's explaining something, and you can be like, I disagree, or okay, I can see that, and I agree. Like I said, I learned quite a bit off of that myself. And so, that's how I end up trying to improve as a player, because I don't have a lot of time to play, but I have a lot of time where I'm like, maybe washing dishes or doing something. I can have something on in the background and watch it while I'm doing an errand, and learn from it, right? So when I play, I'm just that much better. Anyways, without letting this video go too long, let's wrap it up there, guys. If you made it this far, thank you again for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section if you made it this far. Quantum is out.